If you ask Battlefield fans what they think the best Battlefield of the decade was, you'll likely get one of three replies: Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, or Bad Company 2. In this video, we'll talk about why we fall in the Battlefield 3 camp. Let's begin by comparing Battlefield 3 to its predecessor, Bad Company 2. We have already analysed Bad Company 2 in a previous video. If you haven't watched that yet, you can do so later. For now, here's a quick recap. Bad Company 2 perfected environmental destruction, sound design and gunplay, though it did not quite break new ground in visual fidelity compared to its contemporary competitor from Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. It also had a remarkably smaller scope for a Battlefield title, with the notable omission of planes, along with the player count capped at 32 players on the PC. These deficiencies were fixed in Battlefield 3, along with a slew of other improvements which we shall now dig into. Battlefield 3 was released in October 2011, 19 months since the launch of Bad Company 2. To compare the changes Battlefield 3 brought over Bad Company 2, let's begin with first impressions, and by that we mean graphics. While Bad Company 2's visuals were standard for its time, Battlefield 3's visuals were so groundbreaking it was unbelievable that this was a 2011 title. Its textures, particle effects, lighting and models had a level of detail that was so far ahead of its time that it still holds up to this day and can even give modern titles a run for their money. With that said, some maps were better than others. For example, Caspian Border was far more memorable than Terran Highway or Operation Metro, though the desaturated colours and blue tint may have sabotaged the latter's visuals, a point we'll return to later. These post-process filters were not a problem with the maps released in most of their DLC, many of which pushed the envelope even further, both in visual fidelity and in gameplay. More on DLC later. Needless to say, Battlefield 3 had an insurmountable lead over its competition, at least in graphical fidelity. What was even more remarkable was the game's performance, which was surprisingly smooth for such a visually impressive experience. This was not like Crysis, a game that couldn't be played at maximum settings for years after its release. You could push Battlefield 3 settings to the highest and still have a playable performance, even with the hardware of its time. Battlefield 3 could be held up as a poster child of optimization done right, delivering what was the next generation visuals at current generation performance. If that wasn't impressive enough, they delivered this astonishing package just 1 year after their previous title, Bad Company 2. The cherry on top is DICE's refusal to let the limitations of console hardware hinder the experience on PC. How do we know this? From console players remarking on how different the experience is from the PC version. We've already covered this in our investigation on consoles causing downgrades. So if you have watched that video already, feel free to skip to the time indicated on the screen. The console ports are restricted to 24 players for one session, while the PC version supports up to 64. Indeed, if there were any compromises made, they were on the console's ports, with the lower player cap being one such compromise, about which DICE had this to say. If we had more players on console, you might have to take away vehicles because that's a lot of data that has to go through the network and the CPUs. If you had more vehicles, that would mean less players and vice versa. Apparently, map sizes were reduced for the console ports, a design choice DICE justified with this statement. When we say they are smaller, it's not that we have cut them in half, but we tried to compact them slightly to keep the action up. If you compare it to Battlefield Bad Company 2, the maps weren't really small on console. We actually had huge maps, even for console. We have the same kind of angle on it right now in Battlefield 3. This is the approach to development we wish was standard across the industry. The game is built for the PC without any compromise to the initial vision. The features may then be dialed back for the console port if it is necessary to maintain playable performance. If such compromises are made, they should not be transferred over to the PC build. Even if the uncompromised game is too taxing on contemporary hardware, the PC is a modular platform that can be upgraded, and sparing the game from any compromises allows the game to reach its greatest potential, if not immediately upon release, then at least a couple of years down the line when hardware is improved to the point of being able to render the game in its unfettered glory. Games that are allowed to retain their most demanding settings tend to be way ahead of their time, as was the case with Crysis and Battlefield 3. Though, thankfully, Battlefield fans did not have to wait to enjoy Battlefield 3 at its best. Was it the best Battlefield at gameplay though? Did Battlefield 3 improve upon Bad Company 2 in gameplay as much as it did in graphics? Yes and no. One cannot be stated to be objectively better than the other, because the two have considerably different scopes. Bad Company 2 is an intense, infantry-focused shooter with small, linear maps that focus the action into even tighter areas. There are no planes in the game, the maps are just too small for them. The few vehicles Bad Company 2 does feature make quick work of the extensively destructible environments. Battlefield 3, on the other hand, scaled back on destructibility, but otherwise featured a much wider scope with larger maps and greater variety in vehicles than Bad Company 2. Not all maps prioritise vehicle variety though, with Operation Metro being the most extreme example. I felt maps like these, and the ones released in the later Close Quarters expansion, didn't quite live up to the Battlefield series. But I appreciate they added a familiar setting for players who are new to the series and perhaps intimidated by the series' signature vehicles. Players transitioning to Battlefield from Call of Duty could use these maps to get accustomed to Battlefield's infantry gameplay, such as class-specific gadgets, before moving on to using vehicles on other maps. Personally though, I preferred larger maps that didn't hold back on featuring the game's set of vehicles, like Caspian Border and Karg Island. Thankfully, this was the type of map design DICE used for most of their DLC, with the notable exception of Close Quarters, which we've already talked about earlier. With its tiny maps and a total lack of vehicles, Close Quarters was an expansion that discarded everything that people liked about Battlefield in the first place. Its environments were beautiful to be sure, with amazing lighting and textures for their time. The map design was the polar opposite. The chaos left little room for any strategy beyond running and gunning. This expansion pack did feel like an attempt to entice Call of Duty players with gameplay they might find familiar, rather than delivering content that the Battlefield community wanted. I can understand why DICE made this pack, though I am glad they haven't since made more like it. So let's move on to Battlefield 3's other expansions. Battlefield 3's first DLC map pack, Back to Karkin, remastered 4 maps from Battlefield 2. This didn't feel like a lazy rehash because of the length of time that had passed since Battlefield 2's release. The 6 years that separated the two Battlefields had raised the standard of graphical fidelity significantly, and this made Battlefield 3 bringing these older maps to the contemporary visual standard a welcome move. However, this touch-up was significantly hampered by the drab colour palette DICE decided to force in the expansion. This was unfortunate, as much of the detail in the environments, players and vehicles is washed out by the dull, desaturated greys and browns. This deleterious effect the lack of colours have on this expansion is immediately apparent when it's fixed with a mod, though sadly, DICE is reported to have threatened bans for this. Thankfully, drab colours weren't an issue with all but one of the maps released in the expansion we'll look at next. Armoured Kill was perhaps the most game-changing expansion release for Battlefield 3. Not only did it feature powerful new vehicles like the AC-130 gunship, mobile artillery and tank destroyers, but the maps it introduced were the largest, most diverse and, above all, most beautiful environments ever added to the game. If you never played Battlefield 3, you would never believe these graphics date back to 2012. The textures, the lighting, the environmental detail and the particle effects, especially on the AC-130, were years ahead of their time. What's even more impressive is that even though these maps were huge, they didn't feel like the developer had replicated the same areas next to each other to artificially inflate the map size. For example, let's look at Bandar Desert, the largest map ever released for Battlefield 3. Despite the name, the map wasn't just a giant barren expanse of sand. The titular desert actually separated 3 distinct types of environments: a colourful town near the shore, a military base on the sand, and 2 mountainous outposts situated on opposing ends of the map. Each part of the map felt different and presented different challenges in the heat of combat. Speaking of which, the expansion also introduced a new game type that fit the theme of Armoured Kill: tank superiority. As the name suggests, this mode lets players fight over control of one point with tanks and tank destroyers. Engineers are the most viable class here, being the only one that can repair vehicles. This wasn't the case with the next expansion, Aftermath. This is widely considered to be the best map pack ever released for Battlefield 3. As the name suggests, this expansion depicts environments devastated by an earthquake, though I was hoping it would include the actual earthquake as a seismic event that dramatically transformed the map. Perhaps that was an unrealistic expectation, as destructibility was drastically reduced in the move from Bad Company 2 to Battlefield 3. With that said, Battlefield 4 did bring destruction back to the franchise with Levolution, which set the perfect stage for an environment-transforming earthquake. Aftermath would have been the perfect subject for DICE to revisit with Battlefield 4's second Assault expansion. But alas, they decided otherwise. This is a shame, since Aftermath features some of the best map design in all of Battlefield 3, though perhaps not the best colour palette. I was not a fan of the yellow-orange tint, though it did give the environments a sun-scorched aesthetic indicative of the location it's set in. I felt like DICE had finally dropped their love affair with monotonous tints in the likes of Operation Metro and Terran Highway, but Aftermath felt like a relapse. Nevertheless, many felt Aftermath featured some of the more detailed and striking maps in Battlefield 3, and I'm inclined to agree in spite of the unnecessary colour grading. These maps were made for intense infantry combat, with tight lanes that gave you the cover you needed to survive, while also focusing your attention on the enemy. Having said that, Aftermath didn't discard vehicle combat, as all of their maps had transport vehicles with mounted weapons, and 2 maps even had tanks and scout helicopters. Unlike Armoured Kill though, vehicles didn't make infantry irrelevant, as the environment offered infantry plenty of cover to hide behind and attack enemy armour from multiple angles. The environments incorporated some verticality, with multiple floors and rooftops being accessible. The maps were also respectably large, but they never felt like no man's land that you couldn't cross for fear of getting sniped. This was less so for the next and also last expansion, appropriately titled Endgame. Sniping was definitely more viable in the 4 maps introduced with Endgame, as they featured more open spaces, though this doesn't mean the other classes weren't effective. Thankfully, these maps weren't saddled with the obnoxious tint, though their map design wasn't as memorable as Aftermath, and their vehicle selection left something to be desired compared to Armoured Kill. That being said, Endgame did introduce 2 unique game modes: Air Superiority and Capture the Flag. There was a good deal of fun in capturing enemy flags, as making it back to your base without being killed is never guaranteed, and thus always a tense experience. Air Superiority, on the other hand, could perhaps better be named Jet Deathmatch. All players spawned in jets, and the objective was to capture points represented by blimps floating in the sky, though attempting to do so would make you an easy target. This mode might have been preferred by players wanting to experience jet gameplay, but were normally too slow to claim a plane in any other mode. Speaking of jets, planes are the most noticeable change in vehicles in the move from Bad Company 2 to Battlefield 3. There simply weren't any in Bad Company 2. While we're on the subject of vehicles, let's use them as our first example of how the 2 games differ in moment-to-moment gameplay. Battlefield 3 allowed vehicles to equip up to 3 specializations: 1 upgrade, 1 gadget, and 1 weapon. This is a huge improvement from Bad Company 2, which let you pick only 1 specialization in total. For a practical example of this change, Battlefield 3 lets you use both a secondary machine gun and zoom optics at the same time, something you couldn't do in Bad Company 2. This upgrade wasn't just limited to vehicles, but also extended to soldier specializations and weapon attachments. Battlefield 3 allowed weapons to equip up to 3 attachments: the optical sight, an underbarrel attachment such as a bipod or foregrip, and a muzzle modification like a suppressor or flash hider. To be fair, you could equip up to 2 attachments simultaneously in Bad Company 2, but doing so would sacrifice your 2 soldier specialization slots. Battlefield 3 lets you equip only 1 soldier specialization, but you can have up to 4 active if you're in a squad. How? Each specialization in Battlefield 3 has a squad variant, which applies the same bonus to your entire squad. If you pick squad ammo, for example, your squad mates will receive additional ammunition even if they haven't picked the ammo specialization themselves. However, this does not stack, as just 1 squad ammo provides enough ammunition to reach the in-game cap. If another player picks ammo or squad ammo, nobody will receive additional ammunition beyond the cap. The best strategy is for each squad member to pick a different squad specialization. With the right combination, you could spawn with additional ammunition, explosives, grenades, as well as flak jackets to reduce incoming damage from enemy explosives. This was especially valuable for engineers, as not only do you have additional rockets to engage enemy vehicles, but you won't run out of ammunition once your target bails out of the vehicles you destroy. If you were support class, you could have your squad select squad variants of suppression, sprint, flak, and cover to rain a hailstorm of bullets on the enemy while minimizing the disruption from incoming projectiles. These squad specializations provided another incentive to join a squad, even for players who otherwise couldn't care less about teamwork, as even lone wolves benefited from having 4 specializations instead of only 1. Once they were in a squad, they would soon learn there is strength in numbers, and thus learn it pays to stick together and work as a team. In a nutshell, Battlefield 3 made you feel powerful. You could do a lot more than in any other Battlefield that preceded or succeeded it. There were no situations where you felt like your defeat was out of your hands. The additional attachments and specializations gave you the tools you needed to overcome any situation your class could handle, and as a result, you felt empowered to take the initiative rather than hang back and play it safe. The one exception to this was the Recon class, the only class to see a nerf from Bad Company 2. Bolt-action sniper rifles no longer killed in one body shot at close range, rendering the forward recon strategy considerably less rewarding. Furthermore, all scoped rifles had significant sway which could be temporarily dampened by holding your breath. There was no sniper that didn't sway, like the Gold Magnum in Bad Company 2. To make matters worse, aiming down sights with a sniper rifle now gave your position away with a bright scope glint, a beacon to enemy snipers and vehicles. On the flip side, semi-automatic designated marksman rifles received a small buff, now needing one less shot to kill at all ranges as long as Magnum ammunition wasn't in play. At close range, Battlefield 3's DMRs took only 2 body shots to kill infantry at close range, down from 3 in Bad Company 2. At long range, Battlefield 3's DMRs took 3 body shots to kill, down from 4 in Bad Company 2. With all that said, Battlefield 3 is not perfect. No game is. Its single player could best be described as forgettable, though I suppose it could occupy your time if you had nothing else to play. There was one aspect of the campaign I found intriguing. The visuals were significantly ahead of the multiplayer, at least the maps it launched with. I wonder if this was because it was a much smaller scale of the single-player levels, or if it was because DICE spent a lot more time refining each moment of the campaign to look as best it could. This time would have been better spent polishing the multiplayer maps, as a few of them, Terran Highway and Grand Bazaar for instance, look significantly less impressive than the rest of the game. The remarkable jump in visual fidelity brought by the expansions makes me wonder how the launch maps would have looked if they were given the same attention to detail. Battlefield 3 also has 6 co-op missions, including a helicopter mission that provides valuable practice for new pilots to hone their skills before jumping into one in multiplayer. Now let's move on to Battlefield 3's worst flaw, its progression system. If you just bought the game, you started off with basically nothing. No attachments, no vehicle specializations, and very few gadgets to speak of. You had to grind to unlock all of it. As a novice, you didn't even get access to any bolt-action rifles or the defibrillator which you needed to revive down teammates. While you may have been able to get by with no weapon attachments, vehicles are another story. As a first-time pilot, you didn't have access to flares or heat-seeking missiles. You had to grind hundreds of points to those vehicles to unlock them. Except you couldn't because without flares, you were a sitting duck with no defense against enemy missiles. How exactly are you supposed to earn points killing enemies if you get shot down seconds after taking off? This made it impossible to acquire the specializations you needed to operate jets and helicopters at any functional capacity. I was lucky to find an unconventional solution to this unnecessary problem. Find an empty server and drive the jets over land to capture control points for easy XP. I don't think this trick works anymore, as I recall the server wouldn't count scores unless the number of players reaches a certain threshold. I remember wondering why DICE created a progression system so tedious, and then I found the shortcut kits, Battlefield's pay-to-win microtransactions. This is not my opinion, by the way. The bundles page literally touts it as a selling point. Tanks battle it out head-to-head, unleashing ground-shaking fury with their powerful main guns. Attack helicopters fly low, evading radar and aiming armor-killing missiles with precision. Jets duel it out across the sky, dodging air-to-air missiles in a tense battle of skill, and you get access to it all. The Vehicle Shortcut Bundle gives you all 73 of Battlefield 3's vehicle upgrades, including ground-to-air missiles and rockets, thermal optics, machine guns, armor-piercing shells, and stealth capabilities. The battlefield is yours when you download the Vehicle Shortcut Bundle for Battlefield 3. Battlefield 3 features 4 unique player classes, each one an expert in its field. Get immediate access to all 39 of their weapons and gadgets with the Kit Shortcut Bundle. The Assault Kit utilizes the most advanced weapons, including an array of assault rifles, grenade launchers and shotguns, to assail the enemy position. Turn to the Engineer Kit to plant anti-tank mines and delivering a crippling blow to enemy armoured units. Use the precision sniper rifles and laser targeting systems in the Recon Kit to catch the enemy off his guard, or dig into the Support Kit to tear apart infantry with well-hidden claymores and mortars. With the Battlefield 3 Kit Shortcut Bundle, you have everything you need to lead your forces to victory. dominate the skies. Gaining air superiority on the battlefield is the surest path to victory. Unlock all 38 air vehicle upgrades instantly and win the war from above. I found it hard to digest how brazen EA was about selling pay-to-win advantages, but it's even more unbelievable how nobody complained about it. The Battlefield community just shrugged their shoulders and looked the other way, like it was no big deal. You don't need to pay. You can unlock them by playing the game anyway. And while you grind away trying to keep your jet alive, enjoy getting pummeled by pilots who just open their wallet to unlock flares and missiles from the get-go. Despite all of this, a few people still claim to enjoy the progression system, and I wouldn't want to take that away from them. The problem lies with the shortcut kits. It's not that they shouldn't exist. I'm arguing they should be free. If a few players enjoy having to unlock weapons, they should have that choice. Their choice shouldn't be imposed on people who don't want to grind for everything and prefer to have everything unlocked from the start. Having people pay to skip the grind just gives DICE and EA an incentive to design the progression system to be as tedious as possible. Pay to skip grinding microtransactions are borderline justifiable in free-to-play games that don't charge a fee of entry, but they are completely unacceptable in full-priced buy-to-play titles like Battlefield 3, 4 and 1. Thankfully, EA seems to have dropped this model from the franchise with Battlefield 5, but it's up to the gaming community to stay alert and raise their collective voice should EA ever attempt to bring it back in any future titles. We've talked about the good and the bad. Now let's take a look at the weird. With Battlefield 3, EA spearheaded a new system for searching for servers, Battlelog. You couldn't launch Battlefield 3 like any other game. Instead, launching the game from Origin opened a tab in your browser. This was Battlelog, the portal from which you could choose whether to start a single-player, co-op or multiplayer. While many would bemoan the inconvenience of having to launch the game twice, Battlelog did allow you to check the status of your favourite servers without having to launch the game and then discover they were full or empty. Was this worth the hassle of needing your browser to play the game? Let us know in the comments section below. That concludes our retrospective review of Battlefield 3. There is more content like this on the way. Please like, subscribe and press the bell button so you don't miss out. If you like this video, please share it. While you're here, feel free to watch our analysis on Denuvo's history and performance impact, our analysis of Battlefield 5's controversies and our hardware analysis of CPUs and graphics cards. We have a secondary channel, link is in the description and on the screen. Please subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell button.